Can we still go to concerts guilt-free when the world is on fire?
This is the Earth Day Party Podcast with Shannon Burns and Sarah Christie. Get in, bestie. We're going to clean up the planet.
Hi, I'm Shannon.
And I'm Sarah.
And welcome back to another episode of the Earth Day Party. We are diving into conversations with experts about the planet, sustainability, and what we can do to make a difference.
What was the last concert you went to, Shannon?
The last concert I went to, the iHeartRadio Awards. Does that count?
Yeah, that counts.
Okay,
How was that? No big deal.
Yeah, Mariah Carey was there and Lady Gaga. And it was so wild because I got to see Billie Eilish introduce Gracie Abrams, Doechii bring out Lady Gaga. I got to see Bad Bunny perform, which was insane. So that was my last concert. What was yours?
Mine was a little bit of a small one, actually. It was a band called the Cancer Bats, Canadian band.
Cool.
My partner is a metalhead, and he was like watching a kid in Disney World. He was so happy. Before that, it was Shawn Mendes. He did his Family and Friends tour, which was really fun. Was there any mention of the climate crisis at the iHeartRadio Awards?
There was dedications to the firefighters who were fighting off the fires in LA.
Oh, no way.
So they had sort of a fundraising aspect to the awards, which was really cool, but nothing directly about the climate crisis and what we're doing to address it.
Well, that's the thing. You're going to these concerts with so much excitement about the artists you're going to see. Perhaps the climate crisis isn't at the forefront of your mind, but those two worlds are starting to marry. Here are some headlines. For example, Billie Eilish fights climate change with her Happier Than Ever tour. Coldplay works towards net zero on Sustainable tour. It ain't easy being green, how Jack Johnson continues to raise the bar for sustainable touring. So if you really think about some of these massive global awareness campaigns, even, decades ago, Live Aid, Global Citizen, all of the at-home concerts we watched during the pandemic, all of those were brought together to talk about something important, but with a collective enjoyment of music.
And that really makes you feel better, too, about going to certain shows, because I feel like a lot of us have been in the situation where you're going to see your favorite artist on tour. You see all the garbage that's left behind, or the outfits on people that they're not going to be wearing more than once, and all of those things. So it's nice to know, especially when the artists themselves are looking to make everything as green as possible.
Which is why this conversation is really exciting, because music does have such a massive opportunity to move that dial forward toward a greener future.
Totally. So Kim Fry, she's a coordinator of Music Declares Emergency Canada, and she was instrumental in bringing in this chapter to Canada. We even see pictures of artists wearing shirts that say "No Music on a Dead Planet." That is their slogan. I saw that at a Billie Eilish show when she performed Osheaga, and I immediately took a photo of it. So they bring artists, music industry professionals, and music fans together to call for a government response to the climate change emergency.
So in this interview, Kim gets into what artists in Canada are doing to bring climate action into their career, and what we, the fans, can do to lower our impact.
So kind of just to jump off with a big question for you, where do you see the music world and the climate crisis? Where do you see that intersecting, and how does it come together?
There's so many ways that it intersects, but I think for me, it kind of always made natural sense to think about the two of them together, because when I think about my activism or my politics or even just like my view of the world, it was so shaped by the music that I listened to as a child. And I would say that goes from being a huge Raffi fan to listening to Neil Young and Joni Mitchell and Pete Seeger. And then kind of like as I got my own music, like thinking REM and U2, or Natalie Merchant and Billy Bragg. So many musicians who really informed my sensibility around how to see the world, and saw so many of the artists that I really respected and cared for engaged in activism, and sort of like noticed as I was stepping into being an activist how much music really touched people, moved people, inspired people, and that as a musician, you kind of have such a big footprint in terms of your like cultural impact and the ways that you can communicate with your audience. I'm a bit of a history nerd but also a music nerd. So, learning more about the civil rights movement and the power that music played in terms of not just like, professional, well-known musicians, but people singing together in groups as they were opposing the state apparatus and the importance of music kind of like keeping people connected in the face of police brutality, or kind of like holding onto their strength, all felt really important. So I'm just always somebody who's tried to bring music and politics together.
Shannon and I were literally just talking about Raffi right before we hopped into this interview, because I just learned that he helped fund the David Suzuki Foundation. So that's why we both lit up when you mentioned Raffi. So when we're talking about community, there really is no better community than what live music cultivates. But there is this other side that comes with a lot of waste. When it comes to live music, where is most of that waste coming from?
Yeah, so the biggest number one impact when it comes to the live music sector, and the numbers do vary quite a bit. Like I've heard sort of like 60 to 90%. So like I'm going to say probably around 80% in Canada comes from audience travel and transportation. So how audiences get to shows. And if you think about it, like the number of people who fly to go see Harry Styles or Billie Eilish or Taylor Swift, or drive huge long distances to do that is quite substantial. But even like in a city like Toronto, the number of people who just like are running behind and they hop in an, a taxi or an Uber to get to the show instead of taking a bicycle or taking public transit. And so I think there's a lot of work that can be done on that front to both encourage people to be thoughtful around the ways that they get to shows, but also to consume or take in more local music, right? So particularly post-COVID, the numbers are showing that most people's kind of music dollars, they're saving for those big, huge stadium tours, which involve all kinds of extra expenses because you're thinking hotels and airplanes and meals out. So meanwhile, you have all these other musicians and local venues and mid-sized venues and smaller venues that are struggling post-COVID to stay operational. Tons of musicians who are deciding to leave music because they just can't sustain a career in it. So most of the money, kind of like our economy, is going to the uber tiny percent, the super wealthy, the super rich musicians, and not getting kind of spread out a little bit more. I think there's kind of like a really great opportunity to encourage people to, and it's not that you can never go to a stadium tour to see your favorite artist, but to kind of like maybe make more democratic decisions in terms of how they spend that money, right? So every time you spend money on like one of those big artists in the top 1%, spend an equivalent amount of money on Bandcamp or going to a local show, and kind of make sure you're distributing that wealth a little bit more. And we've done some really interesting things around it. So we've worked for 2 years now with CBC Music for the Road to the Junos, where there's 5 nights of concerts happening in the same venue. And we've encouraged, like an email goes out to everyone who is a ticket holder, encouraging them to walk, to take public transit, to cycle, or to carpool. And if they do, they get to enter a raffle contest that's only open to people who've taken a more sustainable mode of transportation to win, free passes to the Junos, for example. So there are really interesting ways that we can work with promoters, with venues, to actually encourage people to just be thoughtful and think about it. And a lot of times people are like, oh yeah, I hadn't even considered that. And so it's just that reminder and that incentive for people to try a different mode.
Well, speaking of that, I know you mentioned Billie Eilish. Both Billie Eilish and Coldplay had initiatives in their major arena stadium tours that encouraged greener forms of transportation. There were even apps involved. So after seeing what they did on such a massive scale, in your expertise, do you think we'll start to see that trickle into other tours?
I think there's interest in doing it. And certainly, Coldplay and Billie Eilish and artists on that scale have the resources to invest with other organizations to kind of like test things out a little bit and sort of then demonstrate how they've managed a lot of reductions by engaging in these activities. And I know Billie Eilish, in addition to the transportation piece, like the big focus has also been on plant-based foods and, for example, showing everyone where all the vegetarian restaurants are in the vicinity of the venue, etc., and promoting an organization that she started with her mom called Support and Feed. And I will say that food is one of the high up ones as well. Like what kind of food gets served at festivals and in those big venues also is a pretty significant source. I think what they've done is they've sort of shown it can be done and kind of created the political will for these kinds of changes to happen and showed how easy it is. And what we need is to give resources to organizations, like Music Declares Emergency or Earth First or Reverb or other organizations doing this work, Center for Sustainable Practice in the Arts here in Canada, so that we can actually work with artists at all different levels, right, in their careers. So it's more of a capacity thing that's missing at this point. And I think a lot of politicians and bureaucrats look at the music industry and go, well, like relative to, say, fossil fuel extraction or aviation or these other industries, it's got a relatively small carbon footprint. So like, is it really meaningful to put money there to invest to try and get reductions in the music sector when it's relatively small compared to other sectors? Not thinking about the cultural impact that artists have, because you're not just like then reducing it, but by doing something, you're giving the platform to musicians and artists to be able to sort of talk about like, hey, I'm playing in this venue and this venue's got solar panels and this venue's has extra bike parking and has buses that are coming in from other places instead of people driving, because climate's really important. And so they then have the capacity to actually message and engage in the kind of cultural narrative shift that needs to also happen. Because I think too often we leave it up to scientists, policymakers to engage on climate. It becomes very technocratic and very numbers and data driven. And that's important. But what we really need is for people to kind of connect with like hearts and minds in a way that will, build a lifelong commitment to climate action. And that's where I think musicians have a role more than anyone else, right? Like if your heart gets broken, you go to turn on a song that's going to help you cry, right? It's like music is kind of I think the most powerful art form when it comes to really deeply connecting with people's emotions.
It makes me think of when I saw Billie Eilish perform one time, and she really does take that opportunity, like as someone who is so influential, to push those things. And I think that's so cool. And she even had like on the screen, it would say like no music on a dead planet. And you just see everyone's phones go up and want to take photos, because I do think that people want to engage in this and they want to help where they can, right? But then also at the same time, I go to different concerts like Taylor Swift or Beyonce, where you can tell that people bought their outfits just for that concert. And I saw a video online where someone showed their thrift store in their city afterwards, and you could see that it's all those outfits that people wore once that they then end up like donating right afterwards. So do you think there's a way to still engage in that and be a part of that, but also do it in like a low waste way?
I mean, I think Billie Eilish has really showed that you can be one of the biggest artists in the world and be really thoughtful around, not just like what is the energy source for my shows or how are people getting there, but also like she does tons of work on sustainable fashion, has worn thrifted and repurposed clothing on the red carpet, and so is like making changes there as well. A lot of the merch that she sells are repurposed shirts. So it's like there's so many different ways that within a tour, within a release cycle, that you can do interesting things. An interesting tidbit around vinyl is that half the people that buy vinyl, for example, don't actually have a record player. So they never actually play the record. They just want that. They want to support the artist. They want something tangible in the age of streaming. And so knowing that, Billie Eilish, half of the records that she made didn't have the vinyl in it. It was like the record casing, like the cardboard piece, but then had other extra special things like download pieces in it and lyrics to songs, special kind of behind the scenes things, right? Because PVC vinyl, it does have a pretty big impact. I mean, there's some really great developments being made on more eco vinyl and bio vinyl, etc. But that was, for example, like a really interesting and creative way of addressing this issue and still giving fans what they want. Unfortunately, and I am a big Taylor Swift fan, but I wish that she had more capacity to sort of think through the impact that she does have and take more kind of responsibility for it, like push back against fast fashion and like really kind of consumerist issues within the music industry of, like fans just buying more things than they really need. And so, she's made a lot of money, and I think she's somebody who could afford to take more leadership on this issue. So, I mean, I think the pressure in some ways needs to come from fans. And certainly, I think when you're a musician, you get lots of people within the music industry telling you, oh, don't say anything, don't rock the boat, wait until you're bigger. Right. And then wait again until you're bigger. And that's one of the reasons I love Chappell Roan so much, is that she's really disrupted that. Right. She's just like, I don't care. I'm going to say it as it is, using her platform to sort of talk about issues and not waiting until that mythic moment when you're like big enough to actually be able to say something. And so I think fans just like really need to encourage artists that they love to be bold, to say things, to support them, and to advocate within other parts of the industry as well. Like, some of the bigger corporations that run a lot of the venues, and like asking them what their plans are as well. So I think fans actually have the biggest influence. And I mean, Taylor Swift does know that. She knows the power of fans. So we just need to marry that a little bit more to climate action.
So from the fan perspective, we're getting into summer concert season, festival season. I know you mentioned transportation, but are there other steps that fans can take to lower our impact as well?
Sometimes self-organizing, but like I think about, there's a ton of summer festivals that are all within like a 2-hour drive of Toronto, and we don't have a culture of organizing buses. So if all the people from Toronto who are going to, say, Hillside and Guelph, or Mariposa and Orillia, or Riverfest in Elora, were to like contact the organizers and be like, hey, could there be buses, and could I help? And I've got 10 friends, and that's a start. Could you help us with like bus transportation so we're not all driving our cars, or something like that? Or just like there's usually an opportunity to fill in surveys afterwards and asking like, could there be more plant-based options, or going up to the festival organizers and saying, hey, I noticed there's a lot of waste, or there aren't enough bottle refill stations, or whatever the case may be, like really kind of like pushing for those things.
It feels a lot of the times as a concert attendee that there isn't a lot of things that you can do, but I do feel like getting together with the masses is like where that change happens. What advice for merch, knowing that that's a big moneymaker for artists and a really nice memory for fans? What's your advice for that, especially knowing that clothing is such a big contributor to fast fashion?
We get lots of artists coming to us for advice because they do want to think about things in a more creative way. And I often say, like, don't just always default to t-shirts. Like, obviously people want a t-shirt. A t-shirt is a good thing, and I'll talk about t-shirts in a second, but are there things that are consumables, things that people are going to want anyway? And so there's bands that we've worked with who do coffee. So they work with a local fair trade coffee maker, and they end up coming up with like a kind of roast that connects with their band. They put their band label on it. And so it's something that people are going to use anyway, but they're also supporting the artist. Or my daughter's looking into doing a fair trade chocolate bar, so she can promote this really great chocolate company based in Toronto that we're family friends with, that use pedal power and solar power to roast and grind their coffee and chocolate, because they make both, work really closely with a community in Oaxaca. So she's like, it's something she really ethically believes in, but people are going to buy chocolate anyway. So it's not buying something that they wouldn't already buy. And then if you are doing more traditional items like t-shirts, repurposing old t-shirts, we have worked with Fashion Takes Action to source the 2 companies in Canada that do the most sustainable new t-shirts that are organic cotton and ethically sourced and made with vegetable-based dyes and inks. Those 2 are Econic and Jericho. So like asking for them. And then if you're an artist and you're charging that little bit more, saying why, saying, hey, these shirts are a little bit more expensive. This is the reason why. We also did a project for the Junos last year where we got these boxes that we put in record stores and music venues, where we are collecting old blank t-shirts from people instead of having them donate them to Value Village or some other big, huge corporation that are going to like jack up the price for these used blank t-shirts. We're like, give them to us. We will then redistribute them to musicians who want to silkscreen their own repurposed t-shirts instead of buying new t-shirts. And so there are really creative ways that we can go about that.
If someone is listening to this going, hey, I wonder if my favorite artist is thinking about this, can you think of one question they could ask them, like sliding into the DMs of their favorite artist being their climate action?
think they could just ask, like, hey, I love you as an artist. I really love your music. I really am worried about the climate emergency. I'm really worried about like the state of our environment. And I'm curious what, if any, steps you've taken to address this within your own business and your own touring. I'd love to see you take those steps. And then if there's an openness and a reception there, encouraging them, they can reach out to us. Music Declares Emergency Canada. We're obviously here in Canada, but we are part of a network of 17 countries that have chapters of MDE. And then we, if it's more work than we can really take on, we kind of have partners that we work with who, the Center for Sustainable Practice in the Arts has something called the Creative Green Tools, and they can actually do the carbon accounting for tours or for events, or like we've worked with a greener festival now called A Greener Future. We're kind of plugged into who the various players are who can help with that. But I think, again, it's like fans have such a huge influence on the artists, on the music industry as a whole. And I think they don't even realize how important and how much of an influence they have. So be loud, ask questions, and be encouraging everyone to take those steps.
Yeah, I think for a lot of artists too, they don't know necessarily what their fans want unless they speak up and say what they want, right? So then I think making that known will probably spark some change as well. What are you currently working on that you want us to know about?
Yeah, so we're hoping that we will be able to launch it's called the Canadian Climate Pack. So it's basically like a little guidebook for the music industry that was created by our UK branch, but we've been in the process of like making it more appropriate and fit better for the Canadian context. And that will kind of bleed into doing some work with festivals throughout the summer, where we're going to be, engaging in greener transportation, but also the circular economy work with the t-shirts. And then we're also working to put out a compilation album record with 20 different Canadian artists, and it will be all climate songs or environmentally themed songs, nature themed songs that will be done on an eco vinyl. We're hoping that will come out this summer. We're pretty excited about that because we both want to showcase a greener way of making vinyl, but also the power that individual songs have to touch people, to move people. And that we're hoping as that gets more support, we'll be able to get the funding that we've been applying for to do Canadian Environmental Music Awards. And so actually giving out awards to artists who are both making that music that's really transformative and really incredible, that touches on themes of climate, environment, nature, but also giving out awards to individual artists, music venues, music organizations that are greening their operations, to just highlight the really great changes that are happening.
Kim, thank you so much for joining us today. Everyone is touched by music. The theme of community is consistent throughout these conversations, and music is community. So we're just so happy that you were able to be a part of this series.
Yeah, thanks.
What's cool about that conversation is how Kim mentioned how connected the fans are to their favorite musicians. And another way to just enhance that connection is to check out the declaration that they have on their website. So you can actually sign their declaration, which is essentially committing to climate action as a music fan. And you'd be joining some of your favorite artists as well. Billie Eilish has signed it, Bon Iver, Aurora, Tegan and Sara, the 1975.
That's so sweet. I'm glad that there's so many artists that are also having this conversation and they know the influence that they have, so fans can jump on board with that as well.
Kim mentioned a lot about transportation. I remember reading a story when Taylor Swift was performing in Los Angeles about a group of Taylor Swift fans who must have lived, a couple hours away from LA. They actually arranged exactly what Kim mentioned, a bus to take them all and carpool them there. They probably had the time of their lives doing something so fun that, well, that's also eco-friendly.
I was going to say, what a fun way to go to the show. You get that party started early. So that, I think, is what I am going to do after this, is find more ways to carpool to concerts and really, just focus on that more, because that is such a huge part of it that you don't even think about, right?
Lower the impact. Yeah, for sure.
Another actionable step that fans can do as well is the whole Choose to Reuse pledge. So what is that all about, Sarah?
Fans choose to reuse. Yeah, so this is a pledge that I actually launched launched a few years ago now, and it just encourages you to bring a reusable water bottle to the concert venue whenever they permit them. So many venues actually allow guests to bring personal water bottles, and it's just not common knowledge. In fact, a lot of the times that information is very hidden, which is so strange. You should be boasting that you are on board with reducing plastic pollution, but we're here in Toronto. All the major venues here allow guests to bring a reusable water bottle and then just fill it for free. So you're also, how much are water bottles at venues now?
Oh, man, it's like $8, if
Right.
not more.
So you're saving so much money, first of all, but you're also reducing plastic waste. It's such a simple step. I used to do this thing on Instagram. I probably should still do it, but I would have people message me the city, and I would find a venue near them that allows reusable water bottles, because that's how common it is. So honestly, it's such a simple step. It saves you money. There's really, it's a win-win.
Yeah. And I think, too, a big thing is people want to buy merch, right? When they go to a concert, and they want to buy that T-shirt just to hold on to something to remember the night by. But there's other ways that you can remember the night, too.
Yeah, like, do you save your ticket stubs?
Always.
We don't really get them anymore.
Yeah.
That's the
I
thing.
do.
You get them
Sometimes
on
I
your
even
phone.
print it out.
I do that too. Okay, that's hilarious. But that's such an easy way to get free merch that's memorable. It's just your ticket stub. Use that instead of buying something that maybe you aren't going to wear or maybe you aren't going to use.
Right. Or have for a very long time. Or just like take extra photos and videos. What are you going to do differently after this conversation?
Definitely think more about the transportation aspect, but also the local music scene. This is a really cute story about my parents. Okay, so my dad is semi-retired, and they love live music. Ever since I was young, we would be going to concerts as a family, but semi-retired means he has free time on the weekends. And so every single Saturday and Sunday, my parents go to local pubs in their area and hear live music. They just go, they order some snacks, and we'll sit there for the entire afternoon. And now, after talking to Kim, they are eco warriors going and checking out live music every single weekend. And it's just, sometimes I'll go join them and visit, if I'm visiting for the weekend. And the bands are so good. It's always a packed house. There's just so much rich local music near you that you might be missing out on because you're saving for the big concert.
Right. So you can go support smaller artists, also save a lot of money with going to check that out as well. Free entertainment. Thanks so much for listening. I'm Shannon.
And I'm Sarah, and thank you so much for coming out to the Earth Day party.
Earth Day Party podcast is in support of WWF Canada. Help protect wildlife and fight climate change during Earth Month with a gift to WWF Canada. You can give now at wwf.ca/earthmonth.